The Apple Vision Pro features built to connect us are the ones that show us exactly why the device is so isolating. You see, a key goal Apple had when they were creating this thing was to let the world shine through to you and let you shine through to the world. But look at me. Aren't you a little unsettled by the way that I look in this thing? Doesn't it feel a little weird? Don't we feel a little disconnected in some way?
Another foundational design goal for Vision Pro was that you're never isolated from the people around you. You can see them, and they can see you. Your eyes are a critical indicator of connection and emotion. So Vision Pro displays your eyes when someone is nearby.
I have now used it enough around my family that they have seen this. To most people who have seen this, it is creepy as hell.
This is both incredibly impressive and slightly unsettling.
If I had to guess, I'm going to guess society is not going to be that okay with it.
I think you look awful.
It's like Botox from hell.
So they did you so dirty, Joe.
How it's implemented, there is some flexibility. Boy, you can make that way lighter if you do like 2 monochrome e-ink screens on the outside of the goggles that look like googly eyes.
It's fancy googly eyes.
As weird as EyeSight is, and as janky as it is, it serves an important function to make it so other people are aware when you can see them. That's important. That's important for the, like, how socially acceptable is this? Because we don't like seeing people with their eyes totally blacked out. The same way it's considered kind of rude if someone's wearing really dark glasses all the time.
My takeaway from it is, oh, I get it.
I think I would like this device less if it didn't have EyeSight. Even knowing that EyeSight is janky and weird. In fact, I would argue in some ways it's almost better that it's janky and weird, because then we can all have a good laugh about how janky and weird it is.
So when Apple Vision Pro was announced at WWDC last year, I was with my buddy and we were really excited about it, right? And we were watching these announcements and we're trying to parse what we were seeing in the video. And there was something that really turned me off to the device. It wasn't the developer story. It wasn't the first generation nature of the hardware. It was EyeSight, right? And I saw these eyes kind of like weirdly floating in front of someone's face, projected on the outside of the display, and I was just immediately turned off, right? The tech obviously was designed to convince my brain that it was looking at a person, but it actually did the opposite. It felt like I was looking at someone who wasn't a person trying to act like they were. And it creeped me out, right? It set off all these psychological alarm bells in my head, right? And I think that reaction is one of the 2 that I have seen when it comes to EyeSight and Persona. And Persona is the feature that empowers EyeSight, by the way. The first one is that it's creepy, right? You have this almost physical, like deep psychological, unsettled like feeling that you get when you look at it, right? The other one that people have is they think it's hilarious. They look at it and they're like, oh my gosh, what is this thing? Like, you look like a dork, you know, like it's probably the most memed feature of the device, right? Like Smosh made a video about it just before the device was even out. So those are the kind of split reactions that I get. And I think that split reaction is also the same way people feel about clowns, actually. Now, stick with me here, but I think that clowns explain why I hate the persona so much. Like, I don't have a fear of clowns, but the people in my life that do have a fear of clowns describe their fear the same way I feel about my fear of this EyeSight and Persona feature, which I don't know if that makes any sense, but I would love to kind of explain a little bit more. So clowns have this long history, right, of walking up to the liminal space of society, right? They walk up to some societal norm and then they poke at it, right? And that makes people uncomfortable. And I think that technology actually does the same thing that clowns do in that regard. They both in some ways have to be innovative, They both have to go up to the line of a societal boundary, and they both have to poke and see what happens.
Nate represents like a type of struggle with masculinity and identity. He is in real time struggling with his own emotions, and he does not really know if he's done something wrong. We have Natalie Palamides, who is playing Nate, so we have a woman playing a man figuring out how to be vulnerable. It's kind of a strange hall of mirrors. You don't really know where things are coming from. Sometimes you don't know if it's Nate's feelings or Natalie's feelings or your feelings. There's something about Nate that I find very charming because I see him trying. But somebody else could experience Nate a different way, could be triggered by things, could be thinking about experiences they've had, and they get to bring that experience to the show. Express yourself.
But in a performance, it's kind of different. Like the rules are different,
Yes.
and that's kind of what a clown is supposed to do. Is they're supposed to distort the rules of the space.
And we don't even really know what the context was. We don't know if his name we don't even know if that was really a person named Lucas.
Yeah.
Maybe he's just a shy guy who that day was like, I'm gonna step out of my bubble and I'll be Lucas.
Which
Because
would be crazy to me.
because the names that he called out later in the show, right? Like when the teacher was doing roll call, it was like, those people were obviously not named that,
Yes.
right? And they were just stepping up and being like,
Yeah.
sure. So maybe he was just doing that, and the woman that was next to him, who was like maybe his wife or girlfriend or something, was like, I can't believe this is happening. So
Yeah.
maybe he was just like, I'm just gonna go crazy today and do this thing. And then he like, once he did it, was like, oh, I've really committed to a bit at this point.
Do you feel like that's fair though to say that the clown, like one of their, like I think back to the historical idea of a clown that you've told me about, that it started out as a jester, and that the jester was meant to poke fun at both the common person and the king,
Yeah.
and in fact had a privilege to poke fun at the royal court that other people may not have had, right? Like it required a special rule.
The jester's privilege.
Yeah, for the jester, basically.
And
So,
like legal accommodations that it was like we
Yeah.
actually like will not and cannot kill you for making these jokes because
Yeah.
otherwise they're not gonna make the jokes. I wouldn't be
Exactly.
making those jokes.
Yeah, and so it literally is their job to distort the rules of the space, which is really interesting to me. So how do you feel like Nate distorted the rules in other ways? Like there was all sorts of examples, but like what are the ones that come to your mind?
Well, I think the just the audience interactions right off the bat, like the audience. I mean, there's in a lot of performance there's audience interaction, but I think even they cut to like clips of the audience, and the audience themselves were like, "Oh my God, we can't believe that he's interacting with them and in such a vulgar way." In some senses, within the first 5 or 10 minutes of the show, he's like going like this and is like, "Who can I touch?" Like, which is like that's such a like, you know. I don't know.
Yeah, you're already breaking so many rules
Yes.
just by doing that.
And the context of how he did it is like, you know, he chugged the LaCroix drink and was like, you know, I get to do whatever I want to anybody in this room. And like, he made that declarative statement. And we know later that the whole thing was about consent.
Yeah.
And like, you know, he's not actually going to do whatever he wants to anybody in the room. He's
But
going
in
to
the
ask
moment.
for permission. But in the moment...
Yeah.
He chugs the LaCroix can, says, I can do whatever I want, and then
Everybody in the
starts
audience
moving
is like-
towards the audience, and everyone's like, can you do whatever you want to anyone in the audience?
The reason I ask about whether you think that that's a good defining characteristic of a clown, since we've been talking about it, is because I think that this is how it actually relates. Famous Steve Jobs quote, giving a speech in, I think to a Stanford graduating class, and says basically your job is to kind of, like a lot of people stay in the bounds, right? They put up the gutters in the bowling alley and they stay within the gutters, right? And that's kind of like what you're told as you're growing up. But it's important to realize that you have to follow your intuition and follow your own path and everything like that, and that your job is to put a dent in the universe, right? And I think what he meant by that is to like push those bounds, right? And it's interesting because it's coming from a white man, if we're taking it from that perspective, right? From a race and gender perspective. But just generally speaking, from a humanity perspective, I think that maybe I don't know if that's one of the things that a clown does, and their role is to push against those norms and push beyond the bounds, right? That is, it's how it kind of relates to the spirit of, at least, of the thing that I've been talking about, is like, this is something that is, that's kind of the job of technology, is to push the bounds at the same time, right? And a lot of times we've seen that happen in positive and negative ways, right?
Right.
In terms of the way it's affected society. So.
Honestly, in some ways, just taboo topics, right? Like, clowns have a space to talk about things in an ancient sense. Being able to make fun of the king is taboo, right?
Exactly.
And then making
so
fun
taboo
of
that you
yourself
again have to have a law to
Ex-
prevent you from getting hurt for doing
exactly.
that. Yeah.
But also thinking about, there's different clowns in different cultures and societies, right? Like, we talked about the Pueblo clowns yesterday, and like the idea that these native clowns were not necessarily pushing back against their cultural norms, but instead reinforcing their cultural norms by saying, here's what falls outside of the cultural norm, and this is not good for us as a people, right?
Yeah, like,
so
it was doing the opposite of what the norm was to reinforce the sanctity of the norm.
Yes.
Right? And you said that was in a tribal setting, right? I mean, the things that I know, I think back to our conversations about Maslow's hierarchy, right? And how he came to that understanding through observing Blackfeet tribes, right?
Yeah.
And learning literally their teachings, right? And again, they saw, as the base of the pyramid, they saw self-actualization as the base of the pyramid, not as the peak of the pyramid, right? And the top of the pyramid was cultural perpetuity, right? Making sure that, and literally what that means is that your teachings are passed on to the next generation, right? So a clown literally served a huge role, it sounds like, in those cultures to pass on those teachings to the next generation. Right?
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about this a lot lately with companies in general, and just any organization, any culture in a lot of ways. And I was thinking about how, just to bring it back to Apple, right? That Apple, one of the big things was when Steve Jobs passed on the reins to Tim Cook, right? And now Tim Cook has released the Apple Vision Pro, which is by far the most important product that he has released, right? It literally is going to chart the future of Apple, basically, on its own. And it makes me wonder about the cultural perpetuity of a company like that, right? And whether the companies that are best at having a long life, a longevity, right, are the ones that have really strong practices of cultural perpetuity, right? They assume that you come into the company self-actualized, whatever, that you have a skill set to contribute, right?
Yeah.
And that they give you the space to contribute that skill set, and that passes up through the company, right? I don't know what a clown would have to do with that, though. Are there clowns in companies, I guess? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, if you think about it, we're all clowns in our own way.
Well, I was actually wondering that too. Is it as the consumer, as the person on the outside, or somebody who's critiquing it? If you're a journalist and you're reviewing a new product, you're kind of you're literally, you're clowning on someone, right? You're literally clowning on them, right? I think about the people that are going out with their headsets on, and they're walking out in public, and they're pretending to grab windows. You can't do that stuff with Apple Vision Pro. They're clowning on the idea of wearing Apple Vision Pro in public, though.
I think something that I've been thinking about a lot in my clown research is the idea that clowns draw attention to the ridiculousness of being human, right?
Yeah, that was kind of the core of what you were trying to think about. That's kind of
the idea of that is really how I would encapsulate a clown, right? and I think that can go in different ways, right? I think that you can address pain and trauma and the raw state of being human in this sad way, right? Where we saw in the clown, the performance that we watched yesterday. But I also think that you can draw attention to the ridiculousness of humans in a surrealist, fun, I made that clown playlist, right?
Yes.
And a lot of those songs, most of those songs were just happy, silly, goofy, whatever. Or the physical comedy that we watched yesterday, right?
Yeah.
There was just clips of people, falling off buildings and getting hit in the groin and whatever.
Really close calls, or
yes.
Almost magical things, yeah.
And that is also the ridiculous nature of being human, in that we see people, getting clobbed over the head, and we're oh my god, like, and it just is like fun for us. And it's
Well,
like,
especially when you know that it's a farce.
yes,
Right? Which
exactly.
is kind of what a clown
yes.
is, right?
And it's just silly to be human sometimes. And so I think I take that kind of, I think when I look at the Apple Vision Pro and I'm seeing these videos of like people just like walking down the street wearing, I mean, it's like you, like, I think that you look ridiculous when you wear it. You look like you're just wearing ski goggles. Me and Miso are looking at you going, does he know he doesn't have ski boots? He needs to go up on the mountain.
Yeah,
like
Miso does not like it.
It looks, no. Both of us are like, what are you doing? Because from the inside, though, it feels so real and you're like immersed in this thing. Like, I've worn it and I'm like, was tripping out. Like, it's crazy. But it looks crazy and silly from the outside.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are also really stuck on that, right? Like,
Yeah.
when I watch TikToks of just like people commenting on Apple Vision Pro, like they're like, he looks like so stupid. Like, what have we gotten ourselves into? Ready Player One, all that, right?
Yeah.
And like, I agree in some ways. It looks ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it also is this incredibly advanced piece of technology.
Well, I think the thing that I've noticed is that, yes, people look at you and you're like, oh, that looks just ridiculous. Like, honestly, as far as they go, it looks good compared to other headsets, right? It actually looks like, the fact that you're comparing it to ski goggles and not saying it looks just like a dumb headset, like a Meta Quest, in my opinion, does, right? Is an advancement.
Oh, yeah.
In its own right?
Totally.
I think that if any tech company had that ability, it was going to be Apple, right? But it still is dorky. It still is dorky, right? Like, I got that first generation Apple Watch like the day after it came out. I remember wearing it at school.
Was it chunky?
Or
did it look like this?
It was a little more squared, and it was less refined than it is now.
Okay.
And I just remember people like looking at it and like making jokes about it and things like that. And I was like, oh, well, like, it was fine by me because I wanted it, right? But then a great thing that happened is like I'd go to McDonald's right after school, and I'd go in and I could use Apple Pay for the first time. And I think I was like the first person ever to use Apple Pay for these people. Like maybe even the first person to use contactless payments in their store. And I walk in there with my store pay, and the employees just looked at me.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like that tech demo. Suddenly they were like, what is this thing? How did this guy just do that, right? And so the same thing has happened with Apple Vision Pro in my experience. People look at it. It's very dorky looking, right? And then they put it on, and then they're like, oh, I kind of get it now.
Yeah.
You know, like I kind of understand.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what it's going to take. It's going to take people putting it on and realizing just how compelling it is to be inside of the thing in order to figure things out.
I still think it's going to take a long time to get used to your persona.
Talk about a clown.
I don't, oh my god.
I should put on clown makeup.
Yeah.
And scan my face with that persona. I just will always
it
look
might,
like a clown.
It might help. It might be like, at least it wouldn't be Uncanny Valley.
I wonder if you were to like do someone's makeup, like in an exaggerated sense, and then do their face scan, if it would end up looking more like them almost.
That, okay, you know how I've done some research on how, on why people are scared of clowns, right?
Yes. Oh, this is interesting.
Yeah. A lot of why people are scared of clowns is you can't see their expressions
emotion.
and their emotions because of their makeup, right?
You're totally right.
And normally makeup, like when I wear makeup, I'm not trying to like totally cover up my face, right? The clown makeup. People are really freaked out because clowns look happy, but they're not.
Yes.
Or clowns, you know, like are presenting one way.
Yes.
And there's obviously the history of killer clowns. And I think there was like one or two original killer clowns, and then there was just like a bunch of tales from there. But no, I think that is maybe speaks to why I don't like your persona, because it feels like it honestly feels like you're wearing a mask,
which you
because
are.
I'm hearing,
you're literally wearing a digital mask.
Exactly. And I'm hearing your voice. I know that it's you. Who, you know, your name's popping up on my FaceTime screen. I'm picking it up, and then I jump scared every time. Every single time that I pick up the call, I go, ugh, who is that? And you're like, it's me. I'm like, I don't know that man.
Well, it's an interesting time, too, because we're coming to the point where it could not be me, given all the advancements in AI. Like,
I hate that.
I heard, like, I think 2 weeks ago, during the initial round of primaries, there was a Biden deepfake voice call that was sent out to a bunch of people, I forget where, basically saying, save your vote, because if you vote now, you can't vote in the regular election, which is just flatly wrong, right? It was a lie, right? But it was using his voice as a deepfake, because there's so much recorded of him, right? So, like...
Deepfakes are scary.
Yeah. So on top of literally a persona is kind of just like a... It's
basically a deepfake.
It's like a deepfake in some ways, right?
Oh, and I hate that. I really hate that.
But I agree that, like, and it's funny because, you know, I would say that the persona feature in beta, right?
Yeah.
Is, I agree with you, it just is not expressive enough. It feels, to me, it feels very, what?
Or too expressive. Do you remember the other day when we were on FaceTime and you made a face and then I replicated it back to you and said, did you just make that face? Because the persona did. And you were like, no. I'm like...
Or like when I was calling Benji and he was like, you look high right
yeah.
now. Right?
Or like, yeah,
no.
you look like you're falling asleep.
Yeah, like, I'm not falling asleep.
And you're like, no, I'm just hanging out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which, again, speaks to the beta feature. But the reason it's interesting to me is because that is also the feature that powers the eyes on the front of the display. Which was, that's, talk about extravagant, right? You do not you don't have to have a headset that does that, right?
Right.
But the reason they did that is because they wanted you to be able to see someone's expression because the eyes are so important for that, right? And so it was kind of like they have the right intentions, but just the technology is either it's literally uncanny valley. You've just towed the line to the point of it almost being perfect, but because it's not perfect, it's freaky. Yes. Which is kind of what a clown is doing, right? It's towing the line between two different things. Yes. It's going right up to the line, and then sometimes crossing it, and sometimes not crossing it, and it freaks people out.
Yeah. And I think that, like, when I think about Nate, right?
Yeah.
Nate wasn't scary looking at all.
Not at all, yeah.
Because he wasn't trying to look real.
Exactly.
He was, like, had these, like, ginormous, big, fake tattoos all over. He's got the Uber tattoo and the Lyft tattoo and the taxi. Like... He was not trying to look like he was actually, or like she was not trying to, like it was a little bit more like an exaggerated like drag is kind of what her what she really compared her own performance to.
Oh, that's interesting.
Was drag.
Yeah. Genre drag.
And I don't think that like, I mean, I know that people have different takes on drag. I don't think people don't perceive drag as scary.
Not in the same way,
for the most part.
Yeah.
Because it's.
Some people do though, actually.
Really?
I mean, like politically,
yeah, but I more mean just like on a face to face.
I think it's the same thing though. It's like you're towing a line between like you're at the threshold,
yes,
and then that freaks people out, but they're not comfortable with
that.
And,
yes, and I yeah. And I would say drag queens also push a social boundary.
They definitely do, yeah.
And
one of the most fundamental social boundaries, which is of gender.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
I feel like it is possible to make this feature better enough in the future if they want to maybe fool adults on a regular basis, but I still don't like it. I see why they did it. We'll be talking this to death over the next 3 years before they finally kill it, but I see why they did it, to try to make this product less antisocial than it really clearly is, but I still don't think it's going to be great. But there does seem to be enough room for improvement that maybe they can make it passable so that adults won't think it's too creepy, and then they can just get rid of it in a few years when they realize it's not worth the weight in battery savings.
So there you have it. To be a clown is to put a barrier between yourself and the world. And that barrier protects you. It allows you to go up to the line of whatever is the norm of society and investigate it and call it out and raise it up and get the attention and chase the clout in some ways, as The Verge has put it. But it also separates you. The wall, the mask you put on to hide the true underlying emotions that you're feeling, to do your best to convey an emotion in maybe a extreme or exaggerated way, it makes some people inherently turned off. It makes them scared. It makes them, at a deep biological, evolutionary level, need space from you. It unsettles them. It unsettles me. And so it's lonely. It's lonely to be a clown. The wall that you place between yourself and the world gives you these impossible otherwise abilities. But it also prevents you from something fundamental. Now, Nilay has talked about this in the past. In his review at The Verge, he said that he wanted to spend more time out here than in there. And after a couple of weeks of using the device, I can see what he means. What I think he misses, though, is that there is a value to being in there. The same way that there was always a value to hopping on your Mac in 1984 and disappearing into the world of the window into Alice's Wonderland. And I think that'll be the case here. The question is whether a different approach is the better one, right? Meta has been, Zuck's been going around touting the Ray-Ban glasses, and I think that there's something to be said about that. In his video, he said that the Quest was a better product outright than Apple Vision Pro. And I'm not sure that that's true. I think it depends on what you want to use the product for. But I think a good product is one that knows what it is. And I think that the Meta Quest knows what it is, though Zuck is trying to paint it in a light that it isn't. The Apple Vision Pro also kind of knows what it is, but it has aspirations in the other direction. I actually think that the Ray-Ban glasses that Meta sells are actually a better product than the both of them. It's a better value, it knows what it is. I haven't used them, but it seemed to have a closer identity or at least a self-awareness of what it is. And on top of all that, it separates you much less from the outside world. So I've said it before, I'll say it again, everything has to be designed for a purpose. And it just so happens that the design goals of this device are aspirational beyond what it currently can achieve. I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, but Apple has a history of iterating well and making decisions along that iterative path. So they're still my horse in this race. But in the meantime, that wall's gonna stay between you and I. Might look like a clown while I have that thing on.